All right, I think we're recording.
It's
So,
still.
hi Chris, how you doing?
Thank you. I'm well. Good to see you, Jelle.
And you are now in Vienna, I think.
I'm at home in Vienna. Yes, I'm not in my office, which is in Salzburg now. But home office is the thing to do at the moment. Kids
Exactly.
are still at school, so I'm happy about that.
Well, it's great also. I mean, we're using this opportunity now that we can connect in a way, in that sense, more easily to someone like you. Otherwise, you would have had to come all the way to Enschede and so on. So it's great to have you on this little show that I'm organizing. Um, So yeah, let's start right in. I already prepared one question, and after that we'll just talk freely. And so the first question is a very basic question to briefly introduce yourself and who you are and what you do in research. And maybe you can also already hint at what you think the relation would be with the course that I'm doing this videos for. And I will give you just one long sentence about what I think the course is about, which is not proof of anything. But the course is about, it's called Creative Intelligence. And we are thinking about how to deal with complex social challenges in which you have many different stakeholders. And so the idea is that all these stakeholders have many different perspectives and they may not understand each other, they may clash. But if you're creative, you could maybe actually use that fact in order to create the breakthrough that you need, the reframing or what have you, in order to come up with solutions to these big problems that you cannot solve within one discipline. That's sort of the general idea. So yeah, can you introduce yourself, Chris?
Sure. So my name is Chris Frauenberger. I'm currently a professor for human-computer interaction at the University of Salzburg. I only started this position on the 1st of October, and I was at the Technical University of Vienna before that. I did a number of research projects around designing interactive technology with kids, some with special needs, autism, also around physical play, all sorts of like different things. The idea was to maybe create technology with children rather than for them. So that was one of the core principles in all of the work that I've done. For what you say, I think it's quite interesting. Human-computer interaction has become a quite broad field, when in the beginning it was all about ergonomics and trying to kind of make technology usable to people. But now with, I think, this kind of pervasiveness that we're seeing of digital technologies in our lives, it has become a field that is reaching into all other fields almost, because it's been, so pervasive in our lives. So I sometimes feel like an imposter because my background is a technical one. So I'm a trained computer scientist. I did even like for high school, I did like a technical high school. And then I started studying computer science. My PhD is in computer science. But I then kind of started to kind of look more into the social sciences and also philosophy predominantly, because I saw that a lot of questions that we had around the use of technology by people cannot be kind of thought of as technical problems. They are much more. They're like fundamental philosophical problems sometimes, and also sociological problems, in that, we want to know what people do, and not just with technology, but embedded within a social context. So, in relation to what you're trying to do in that course, I feel I have done quite a bit of kind of venturing into fields that I'm not originally trained in.
Exactly.
And I try to kind of build bridges to people who know more about me, about other things. And that is a particular skill that you kind of develop probably. both of us were involved in writing a number of grant proposals together with people who had very different background as well. And just, you know, the experience of sitting in a room for like 2 days and trying to kind of wrap your head around what other people are trying to say and where they're coming from is an exercise that is sometimes frustrating. But at the other hand, it's also deeply fascinating because if you let yourself experience that, you sort of like see how in different ways the world could be perceived and made sense of.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a
Yeah, you're already hinting at like a number of things that I wanted to ask you more about. So that's quite nice, and I do think that, and exactly that experience that we had was one of the reasons also why I wanted to ask you, because I know that you also have this philosophy and sociology. So you have multiple disciplinary interests already in you, but you probably also do realize all the time that how different these frameworks are, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because a colleague of mine is a trained philosopher. He's working with Mark Zuckerberg and in the robotic technoscience field. His name is Michael Funk,
Oh yeah.
and he's a brilliant mind. And we're working quite closely for a number of projects. But I kind of, you know, whenever I kind of talk to him, I realize that there's so much philosophy, basic philosophy knowledge that I'm lacking, right?
Yeah,
So it's just like the old Greeks and, you know, modern philosophy. And there's just I mean, it would be ludicrous to think that you can just read philosophy like 2 years and then you have an education in it, right? But there's always things that you don't know at all about, and there's also a foundation in philosophy that I'm completely lacking. I have learned to be a bit more self-confident about that because I think I always say like I'm no expert in philosophy, but I'm using philosophy for my purposes,
yeah,
and that makes me an expert in using that philosophy for my purposes. So in a way, you know, they sometimes correct me about what Heidegger really meant, but at the same time, I feel I can bring something to the table that a lot of philosophers have no chance of bringing to the table because they have no connection to the technical world in ways that I have.
sure.
So if we find like-minded people, like in the collaboration that I described, it is relatively easy to kind of have a forth and back between expertise. And if you acknowledge other people's expertise and be humble about your own, I think it goes a long way of getting this transdisciplinary collaboration, you know, forward. I quite like the idea of transdisciplinary, which to me means like you can go together to places that you couldn't find yourself, and that is
Exactly.
equally true of both sides, right?
Yeah, it's like there was this famous paper in HI, the third space. Do you
Yeah,
know this? So I'm always thinking of that term, right? So if you go transdisciplinary, you go into this new space that you're all on sort of equal terms. So
yeah,
it's leveling the playing field a bit. Can you say a little bit, maybe very concretely, about you worked with kids with autism, and
yeah,
so I guess you worked with the kids. Maybe you saw their parents, the therapists, other experts maybe who know all about psychology, and then the technical people because you wanted to build technical things that would support them or help them. Um, do you have experience of like concrete experiences of where these different disciplines were really clashing, and then, or maybe that you really solved that, or that it actually went really
mm.
well, and what made it work, or what were the barriers?
um, hmm. Yes, so indeed, like in most of my projects, I worked with a very heterogeneous set of participants, children with very different needs and parents and other stakeholders. You know, there's a whole education system behind schools that is very hard to move or to
Yes.
deal with. They have their own agenda, they have their own workings, they have their own language even. but also within the team, I think we've been quite diverse. In the last couple of years, I had two excellent industrial designers coming in. We had people from a more computer science background. We had people, with other backgrounds coming in. I think there is a there's a usual curve that I like to think about when I describe these collaborations, which is a coach once described it to me like when you go on holidays with people you don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And in a way, in the beginning, you're telling each other how great everybody is, and you kind of have to overcome this phase, because this is kind of giving everybody self-confidence, and everybody is kind of bragging about their own expertise. And then there comes a moment of conflict, because then people start realizing that these different expertises might kind of touch the same thing from different sides and point you towards different directions.
Yeah, then
and
you really have to choose, or you really have to,
yeah.
I mean, it really matters at that point, right?
At that point, it kind of starts, the friction starts to emerge. Yeah. And then it kind of depends on how you kind of deal with that point when the friction, in the beginning, everything is very friendly. And then it's the bragging phase. And then there's the conflict phase. And it depends on that conflict phase where you're going. It can completely break down. And I have experienced that as much as where everybody kind of maybe let it sit for a moment and reflect on it and say like, oh, maybe there's something to it. And we can, if we put our expertises together, then we can go to that third space. For me, one of the key things in doing that is that the conflict in itself can be the very reason to be. It doesn't always need to be agreement or consensus. No. But a constructive conflict is almost worth more than a shabby a consensus.
Yeah, not putting the blanket over it, and then
and like, oh, let's not look too close, and let's say we agree, and that's fine, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like, the two of us have these kind of conversations where we know we sort of like a little bit disagree, and we kind of it's a never-ending discussion, and the point is not to agree. The point is to discuss.
Yeah.
And I think this is a lesson that I've learned. And for this, you have to kind of give space to other people and their opinions. And this is true for autistic children as much as like your colleagues from industrial design.
Yeah.
And recognize what they do well. We've just our last project ended only a couple of months ago, and we had the opportunity to exhibit in COVID times, exhibit some of our stuff there.
Cool.
And it actually turned out that, my idea of doing an exhibition was far too kind of simplistic. I was just thinking like, let's put the stuff into the space and write something nice to it, and then that's an exhibition, right? But then, of course, the industrial designers know exactly what it takes to kind of exhibit stuff. And there was a lot of work going into that again, and sort of like making it exhibitable in a way that, you can, and the results were amazing, but I had to give them space and say like, better, you know how to do this. And they did.
So it's also trust, right? But trust is also difficult, because sometimes you have your own interest, and you think, well, I really want to do this.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, in that instance, trust was easier because we already had such a good relationship as a working group, right? But if and of course, trust is more difficult if the stakes are high and you don't know each other very well. And I think trust is also more difficult when the relationships are not that clear. In that case, I was the project lead, the PI, and they were my co-workers. So it was easy for me to kind of to delegate something. Yeah. That was my job, right? But obviously, on a more um, on a more equal or more heterogeneous kind of power structure, these kind of collaborations are much harder to establish, because we don't, you know, what is within my rights to kind of delegate, for example, or,
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah. If there's no sort of defined superstructure that already defines the relations.
Exactly. So I guess the keys for making situations like that work is respect, decency, humbleness about your own contributions, and listening, active listening more than
Yeah.
saying
Are these
things.
also things you learned from? Because I know, of course, you are already also really into participatory design, which is a whole field in and of itself within HCI, so to speak, or even broader than human-computer interaction nowadays. But there's a lot of theory. So that's a research field that is, on the one hand, very practical, how to involve people into the design process that are not the professional designers, in the broadest sense, maybe.
Yeah,
But that's a very practical way of putting it. But if you go to these conferences, there's a lot of people with a lot of theoretical tools and frameworks trying to
yeah.
make sense of what goes on if you put a number of different people together in a room, right? So maybe do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what are theoretical ideas or concepts that maybe come from that, or maybe from philosophy more generally,
Mm,
that you think, well, this really says something um, about different people with different backgrounds and different perspectives coming together. And well,
mm,
I mean, I'm thinking also, of course, myself of Hannah de Jager's participatory sense making, because that is a thing that but maybe we can talk about that even after,
mm,
if we still have time. In this workshop that you talked about with you and me, it was all about participatory sense making. So that's
mm.
also an interesting topic. But I don't know, do you have other uh,
So
ideas about concepts or theories that speak to this?
so the whole field of participatory design, of course, as you just said, is about bringing people together who have different interests and different agendas and intentions to kind of design technology, and not only technology, I guess. um, and for that, you know, since decades, participatory design has developed a lot of methods around how to do that. In the field revolves around the methods, and it's not so much about the theory. I think we could use a little bit more theory around that. One of the most striking and interesting things around the theory for me in the last years was exactly that point about conflict and consensus and
Hmm.
compromises, because I guess a lot of the PD methods that have been out there were geared towards bringing people together for collaborative decision making in a democratic way, and that
Consensus was always
was
the
a
goal.
consensus building moment, right?
Yeah.
And
Create
this,
harmony in a way.
yeah, and
Yeah.
this of course has merit, but it also is a little bit blind to the ways in which sometimes conflicts evolve into something where there cannot be a consensus because I'm just having a very different perspective, or I'm just having a very different need towards something, right? um, for example, as a practical example, right?
Mhm.
If I were to kind of give autistic children complete control over what we build, right? They would build something that I would think is not what we should be building. You know, they would build something, I don't know, a video game with which they can sit in the corner and you know, be left in peace for days.
Which is not good, or I
Which,
mean, that's already, then you start to
yeah, I mean,
ask these
so
questions, right?
I have my agenda, you know, and I have my normative kind of expectations. This is not what I'm here to do. This is not what I'm trying to research. This is, I don't think, what is good for you. This is like even projecting my own things on other people, right? And there's fundamental conflict, right?
Yeah.
I will not, probably like with my kids, I will not allow them to kind of be on the phone for
Mm.
days on end, right?
Can you be neutral as a if you're deliberately trying to be sort of the facilitator of this? Then of
I
course
think this is,
the idea is that you would be neutral to it, right? You would not be part of the people in a
yeah, I
way.
want to.
Is that an illusion?
This to me this is an illusion, and I really like Slavoj Žižek's take on this, where he described once the change of government in Italy with Romano Prodi coming in, like, and everybody was peddling that narrative that now it's a technocratic government and they're just doing, they're just experts.
Yeah.
So objective what they do. And then, of course, Romano Prodi was an executive coming from Goldman Sachs. And you think, like, is this in any way neutral, or is this just expertise? And expertise never is neutral either. People in SDS knew that for decades. But, still the narrative was like, this is just experts doing it until we have elections again.
Can you explain that maybe a little bit more? Because I think that's interesting to people may think indeed that expertise is just having knowledge about something, which is a very objective. I'm a scientist. I know everything about atoms, so I'm the neutral guy.
This
is
going down a very difficult epistemological debate, right? What can be known about?
So in what can you explain it in one tweet? Sorry. Oh, we're lagging. I'm gonna cut this part out. Are you here still?
You're still there. You're not moving anymore, but it's back. It's back.
It's back.
So maybe you need. Well, this is the reality of Zoom calls. That's another thing. I think, to me, it's very dangerous to say that there is objective truth, but it's also very dangerous to say that we cannot know anything about anything anyway. So there is a middle ground between these two extremes, which are called relativism and positivism, right? The idea is that not everything is socially constructed. It's not everything is just up to our agreement. We cannot just say something is true because we agree. There's more to that, right? There is something like evidence. There's something like agreed knowledge. And we can also, I think we need to kind of hold on to a notion of we know better than before. So there are qualities of knowledge that we can assign to things that we know. But it's also, I think, completely false to claim that, we can know everything and for certain, and that there's something totally objective out there that you can just look at and this might be almost true in parts of physics maybe, but even there with Karen Barrett kind of has this famous example of the two-slit experiment where the wave particle duality of light is described in a physics experiment, and there, depending on what you measure, you change the phenomena. Right? Yeah. You change reality by, if you measure a particle, it behaves like a particle. If you measure the wave, it all of a sudden is a wave, right? So it really changes reality by you looking at it. And this is a good example of there might be not one objective truth, but there is causality, and there is something that we can know. And there are things that we can refute as saying, to the best of our knowledge, this is not true.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, science and more generally humanity is in trouble. If we cannot know anything anymore, then
right. And of course, many people are thinking about this right now, also with the whole political and
the whole idea of like discrediting science as fake news is an attempt to kind of push us towards this relativism that it says like, well, you just made it up, right?
But
And
you also related it to interest, right? So the Goldman Sachs guy, Bruni, was
exactly,
not
I think it's
objective because he had his own stakes in it. Can you say a little bit more about that?
absolutely, and I think this is very interesting. You know, knowledge comes with a certain intention and agenda, I guess. You
Hmm.
know, and that is true for Romano Prodi. You know, coming from Goldman
Brody.
Sachs, he has had a particular view on the world that he superimposed on the government, and to sell this as objective expertise is super dangerous because it's everything but objective.
Yeah.
Right? Um, it do you know The Usual Suspects?
Yeah.
The movie. Um, he says a sentence towards the end where he says, like, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to make the world believe that it doesn't exist. And
Yes.
this is where, you know, ideological stakes are hiding. They are hiding behind expertise. They're saying, like, we're just experts, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, this is also, knowledge is political.
So
It's
I have always experienced this in every brainstorm, creative session, meeting where people need to together create, even if it's very practical, like just a bunch of colleagues defining a new curriculum or something.
yeah,
You immediately see that people speak as if they display knowledge. They're going to tell you the way things are, but behind that is always some kind of, this is what I want, or this is what I need, or this is what I'm interested in or
yeah.
invested in, right? So
And this is precisely where, so coming back to participatory design, we're making the circle.
yes,
I think this is precisely where actually political theory got me interested in participatory design, and say, like, how is participatory design in itself a political arena? People come
exactly,
together, have agendas, intentions, and want to build something or change something. This is a political process, so political science should be able to say something about that, right? And so I'm not the first to kind of have that idea. Other people kind of had similar ideas, and in the very beginning of participatory design, it was highly political, of course, with Pellein drawing on Marx, for example, you know.
yeah,
But later on, one of his colleagues kind of started reading Chantal Mouffe. She's a Belgian political scientist, and she has this notion of agonistic agonism, which she distinguishes from antagonism. The antagonism is the war, it's the outright conflict, the destructive conflict. And agonism is the conflict in which you still would call productive.
yes,
So respectful conflict, or a disagreement that you can still work on. And
exactly,
And I think this is the line where I see, this is really interesting, right? This is the line where I see we all need to kind of put our intentions and agendas on the table, and try and find a political arena in which we negotiate what we will do together. And this is true for politics, but I also would say that we need to kind of repoliticize technological futures. And this is the whole point
exactly,
about, you need to talk about what we need to build. And we need to kind of maybe create arenas where we come together and say, like, you know, I have this agenda, I have this intention, this is where I'm coming from. I also have this knowledge and expertise, which is also a political entity. And then you need to kind of create a space in which you can disagree. And it's
exactly, yeah,
like with our discussions, sometimes it's not the point of agreeing afterwards. Sometimes you need to make decisions that you kind of have to make compromises for. That's okay. But it's also okay not to agree. And it's
exactly,
the arena and it's the process of agonism that is the raison d'être, as she would say, Chantal Mouffe, for politics.
So
And
I
think
actually agree with that, Chris.
damn.
Too bad.
Yeah, too bad. We need to talk about other stuff where we disagree. No, but I think this is an interesting thought, and because you asked me about theoretical lenses on participatory design that I find interesting, and to me, this is the most interesting at the moment, that we maybe in the last 20 years, we have looked too much towards methods that would help us come to decisions, and designers have that natural impulse to kind of solve
Yep.
stuff, while sometimes not solving it is equally valid and sometimes the better thing to do. And I can give you a very concrete example that we published actually. When we did our participatory design with our group of children, there was a conflict in the design process where some of the children said, we wanted to play with this technology in a very sensory way. It was like a music, you could, it was like a pads where you could step on and you produce music collaboratively. Yes. And some of the children said like, oh, I just want to use it as an instrument and you know, in a very sensory play environment, just play with it. And others saw it much more like a puzzle. They wanted to know what each of the paths were doing. They wanted to kind of find out and solve the puzzle. Yes, investigate. And there's an awful lot of social coordination necessary to do that, because nobody else can step on it, and now you step on it, and you step on it.
Yeah,
and, you know, there's a lot of
figure out the algorithm, or
yeah. And some children were not interested. They just like, I want to play. I don't care, right? And this was a conflict. And normally a designer would say like, okay, now we have to go this direction or that direction, right?
Yeah.
And we tried not to solve that problem. We put the conflict into the design. So we ended up with a design where we had this system, and on the base station had like a big red button. It was really like a shiny, like a nuclear power button, right? And that button had the function to randomize the mapping. So every time you push that button, you sort of like destroy the puzzle, right?
Oh dear.
And you can imagine that some people were really angry. You know, the children who wanted to kind of do the sensory play, you know, and couldn't do it because the puzzle solvers always kind of told them not to step on the plate, would go to the base station and just bam.
Take control in a way.
And then the puzzle solvers would say like, why did you do this? We didn't figure out what did what, right?
I was almost finished.
Yeah. So, and it was not to us to kind of solve the problem, but we kind of made the conflict a part of the design.
Yeah, exactly. There's also one other aspect of this, but because before we round off, like as maybe a final thing that touches on this, is that the tangibility of the thing did something. I mean, not in the discussions leading up to the design, maybe in this case, but the final result was still managing a process in a way, right? Or it was influencing. And I think that's something that you of course would always know about, because in the end you are a designer and you are you think about the role of things in these processes, right? Can you say maybe as a final topic a little bit about that, because the assignment that we give our students is also about making something really concrete that in the end fuels or stimulates or scaffolds or whatever word you want to put to it, these processes.
I think things really have agency. This is where we start disagreeing, to shape human behaviors, right? And you maybe like many decades ago, HCI hung up about affordances, and then it became really not very fashionable to speak about affordances anymore. Maybe it's time to kind of look back to affordances again and see how maybe this is a concept of understanding the agency of things. But I think, you know, the button in that example really did something. It changed the way you could interact, and it changed the way the human behavior was unfolding.
Exactly.
And of course, I, as a designer, kind of did this and had the intention to do that and had an agenda. This was a conflict that we picked up and tried to kind of put into the system.
Deliberately,
right?
yeah.
Deliberately. And other conflicts, we just, you know, put our foot down and said, like, this is like it is. We're not having that. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, this is power, and this is a power game, and this is, I'm not idealizing it. I'm having my own agenda just as much as anyone else. But things have power in shaping stuff, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it was mediating the power relations between those two groups,
yeah,
right? Otherwise, the other group might have been completely dominating, like, oh, you have to do this. The natural director of things kind of kid would take over and start ordering around. But now you gave the other kids a way to just crash it. Sorry?
Yeah, it was literally empowering some
Yeah,
children in that process, right? Because it was very easy for them to kind of just sneak in and press the button. But and this is the power of things, right? This is the power that you can produce. Where exactly that agency lies is a matter of philosophical debate. But as a designer, you need to realize that any materialization of something will change human behavior and power structures. And in
exactly.
that, you know, you cannot always predict exactly what it does, but you can always design with intent, right?
And this goes to the level of if you make cards, what people can write something on in a brainstorm session, like, and the box you draw around it and the word you put above it, all of that adds
Yeah,
to it, right? It's not just buttons with technology connected to it. It's just about things around us. They steer us a little, right? Or
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize this complexity. In, you know, this is why I really love this kind of relational view on you know, there's a whole bunch of philosophy, you know, quite well, that I'm into that. But this kind of, that we become who we are and what we do by in relation to other things, you know.
exactly,
It's the cup, it's the hammer, it's the fire, it's the smartphone, it's all of us. All of these things kind of make us different people, and in the way we interact and stand in relation to these things matters. And I think this is where, for me, a lot of the ethical concerns come in and say, like, you know, you cannot just put something into the world and say, like, I'm not responsible for it, because it changes things.
exactly. You're messing with people if you.
You're messing with people. Yeah, absolutely.
All
Everybody
right. Everybody does. Well, I already took up more of your time than I originally promised you, so
that was to expected.
secretly, implicitly. Chris, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. It was the first one that I'm recording, but I think if this is going to be the expectation for the rest, I'm going to have a really great series of very inspiring interviews.
It was a pleasure, and I'd be very curious to kind of hear how it goes with the students and what they make of our chatting.
Yeah, definitely. They also have to do an assignment, and it could be that for one or other reason, your talk is especially touching on what some of them are doing. Then maybe they'll reach out to you and ask you a question or something like that. But then, well, you will hear about it. In any case, I hope they will enjoy it and be inspired by it. And I certainly was. So thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
I wish you a good day and healthy times in Salzburg.
To you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.